Greetings, everyone. I'm Madeline Di Nonno. I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of the Gina Davis Institute, and I would love to introduce our illustrious ASL interpreter, Rachel Groner. And I am joined today by the phenomenal director of Thea, Sharrock, and I'm also joined by star Anjana Vasan, and we're here to talk about Wicked Little Letters, which is playing globally. And if you want to have an hour and 40 minutes of pure joy, you must run to the theater as soon as possible. So Thea, I'm going to start with you. Let's talk about Foxy Ass, Letters, and Little Ham. How the heck? Oh my God. Oh, and note, send the children out of the room. There may be a lot of swearing and curse words in this discussion. But anyway, over to you. How did this happen?
That's a great introduction. Nobody's yet come across, actually started off with Foxy Ass. First of all, thank you so much for having us. It's brilliant to be here. I think it's so amazing the work that you do, and it's really a privilege to be on this with you. So, I mean, what can I say? This script turned up for me, not knowing anything about it except for Olivia Colman was already attached to play Edith. I didn't know that it was a comedy. I had no idea it was based on a true story. I had all of this to discover. So I read it in one go. I laughed out loud. I thought, what the hell is this story? Who has invented this? And then I discovered that, honestly, well, let's start with the letters themselves. 80% of the letters that we use in the movie are the real thing. They were written. I've seen them. I've seen the handwriting. They are for real. That's where the story began. And honestly, we've stuck pretty closely also to what really happened. This Edith is real. Rose, her neighbor next door, she's real. She really did go to prison. And Gladys Moss really was the first police officer, female police officer of the south of England. And she really did uncover the story. And in many ways, it's thanks to her that as a result, we have this. And loads of like the most crazy moments within the film. I don't know how much of the plot you want to give away. They're all true. All the ones that you think we've all made up, we haven't. They were in the real thing. So, and then from there, we had a great starting point for a story. The script was in a great place when it came to me. And to start with Olivia Colman as your lead, from there, casting the project was an absolute joy.
It's just phenomenal. And did you shoot in the town or did you just shoot elsewhere?
We wanted to shoot in the town, but the town is now quite modernized, so it doesn't look much like it did 100 years ago. So we shot, but not very far away from the real place. So we shot just up the road.
Wow. And Anjana, I have to go over to you because Gladys Moss was a badass. She was almost like a Rosie the Riveter, right?
Mm-hmm.
To World War One. I mean, when you look at these photos of her, kind of stoic. Tell us about encountering her, how much research. I know she's got a plaque now somewhere. How did you embody that? But yet your comedic timing is just brilliant. So how did you mush all that together into this fabulous character?
Gosh, I mean, it helps when you have, the wonderful thing about Gladys Moss is that she gets to meet everyone in the story. So, one day I'm turning up and I have a scene with Olivia Colman. Another day I turn up and it's a scene with Timothy Spall. So when you have scene partners like that, I think you actually have very little to do on your part because they help make your job so much easier. The wonderful thing about playing a character like Gladys Moss is that she doesn't have it's like stepping into someone's shoes and trying to think what it might have felt like for someone who didn't have a frame of reference. Yes, in our story, we talk about her dad and the connection that she has with her dad, who is a cop as well. But being a woman and, getting into that uniform for the first time, I remember Thea and I discussing, I think her hat should be just a little bit too big for her head and the skirt's just a little bit too long because it's almost like she's trying to fit into the role. And I think there's an element both of Edith and Rose within her. So when you first see her, she feels like someone who's just trying to do the right thing and get on with the job. But there is this streak of disobedience and like a bit of a rebel inside her. And I think when she starts relying on her own intellect and her own strength and instinct, that's when you really see her come to life. And you see it almost like more relaxed and, as you say, badass version, I think, as the story progresses. And I think she gains that strength as well, not just from the inside, but from other people in the community. And I think she reaches out to the community for strength, and that's where she gets it from. So yeah, it was a joy to play her, really. And what I found fascinating is that she was just a footnote in a lot of the records. And I think it was only after people started writing about the story that her story came to light. So it really is one of those things where there's so many characters in history that just kind of get sort of swept into the footnote element of the page, and actually she's such a big part in the story.
So I have a question for you. So I know that she has descendants because of the plaque that was put up in what, 2015, 2016. Did you ever encounter them, or were they happy that their auntie's story, finally got the light of day? Just curious about that.
That honestly, I have no idea. I don't know if Thea, if you had any sort of connection to family or relatives that reached out at all, but it was, there's stuff that I found out through the case about her, but there isn't a lot that's sort of not related to the case, if that makes sense. In terms of research, yeah.
So Thea, back to you. So what I don't know if our audience knows is that, every other word out of my mouth is probably some type of curse word, although you don't swear in nonprofit, so usually on the weekends. But in the 1920s, language, let's talk about the language, because you had to mix the actual language of the time with contemporary audiences. And it was very, very commonplace for men to swear, but it was very, very unusual. We're talking about like World War I. So how did you juxtapose the language in the letters of the time, but also making sure that it appealed to an audience today? Like, that's a lot to mix up.
It is, but to be honest, I'm quite surprised by, not all by any account, the reaction sometimes that we've had about the language that we've used in the movie. Some people, and it's been very interesting watching different nations have quite different reactions. So like the Dutch, for example, have gone all out for this movie because they think they swear more than anybody else, and they kind of have a sense of ownership over the movie. There are certain parts of England that the movie starts off and you don't quite know how they're responding, because as the swearing kicks in, you get quite more like a intake of breath, and then they get more and more bold, and by the end they're laughing loudly. In America, it seems to me, they are so happy to laugh at us Brits and to laugh at us using language like that and being so open with it. So that reaction has been very big and very it's interesting, because also it tends to be that if people have a really big reaction at the beginning, the more laughter that we get, by the time we get to the end, there's almost more heartfelt. It's almost, people have connected so immediately with Edith and why her need to swear, and why there is so much bad language within the movie. Because it's not that she's trying to hurt anybody. It's not like we sometimes, obviously we all know how people use curse words nowadays, right? In that moment, yes, okay, of course the letters are out, but it's more that are out to, offend somebody else. But quite quickly, I think you realize there's a need, what the need is behind the person writing the letter. And what that is, the need to find a voice. It's almost like a child, right? There's almost a very sort of innocent use of these words. Some of them are used very well and quite sophisticated, and other ones are like, it's like a crazy combination of words that kind of should never work. And there's a great big scene at the end where one woman who finds cursing very easy literally stands up to the other one and says, "Why do you always say that? Nobody curses like that. What are you talking about?" And actually then the next set of curses that come out have got much more of a rhythm to them, you know, so they're kind of constantly teaching each other. And I think that's one of the reactions that's been so heartwarming, is that people who really understand and want to actually look out for the woman she's in a really, really, really dark, tough spot. And this is a cry for help. This use of language is effectively a cry for help. And if you can recognize that in her, even though she's not easy to like, you love her by the end. You are clapping for her by the end. You are cheering for her freedom, that she has finally, she's put so much on the line and she doesn't care what she's lost because her freedom means so much. And the use of language, I believe, is a hugely important part of her finding this new inner self that all her adult life has been clamped on, and she's barely been able to breathe, let alone curse. So I think it's really interesting how, particularly in America, people recognize that really quickly, and they support it and they hold on, and they understand that Rose is somebody who has, it's like she's injected her with a sense of confidence and like, you know what, we can be like this, we can speak like this, we can have thoughts like this, we can wear clothes like this, we can do this. And so the language for me is just part of that journey that the lead character goes on.
So in terms of finding your voice in the journey, Anjana, I want to go back to you because I would love to know what the table read was like. And when you think about Jessie Buckley and Timothy Spall and Gemma Jones and Malaki Kirby and Alicia Weir and this, you know, phenomenal cast, what was it like? Well, first of all, did you know each other? Had you ever worked together? And what happened when you all came together? Like we must know.
I don't think I knew anyone before filming. So I felt, you know, walking into the read through a little bit of a, well, I don't know how I sneaked into this room. And then I remember I was sat next to Joanna Scanlon, and you know, I'm a huge fan of Joanna. And by the end of the film, or so by the end of the read through, I sort of turned to her and said, I think our characters become friends, which is something that didn't quite sort of hit me on first reading of it, you know. And there was something about, even just in the read through, I felt there was already a chemistry between us that surprised me. And she said, yeah, I agree. I think they're kind of these little odd couple, you know, chemistry. And I think they kind of find each other. I think because they're both in a way sort of quite lonely, awkward people. And I think they sort of see a connection in, you know, each other. And honestly, I don't know. I think it's true sometimes that the most talented people are like the nicest people, really. And with the case of this film, it is very much please meet your heroes. So like I said yes to this film faster than you could say Olivia Colman, and I'm so happy to report that she is everything you want her to be and more. And that's true for, I think, the whole cast, you know. And I think that's the skill, is in bringing people together and somehow knowing that this group of people will have an ease with each other and a generosity amongst each other. It felt like being in a rehearsal room, like a theater rehearsal room. And you know, I have a theater background, and that's some of the most like happiest experiences in like a proper collaborative theater room. Like some of the best experiences I've had have been in those kinds of rooms. And it felt like that sometimes on set, where, you know, everyone had a voice and everyone was very generous with each other. And my favorite memories are, you know, when we weren't shooting and waiting in the green room, everyone was just sitting in a circle around Dame Eileen Atkins, listening to her tell us all these stories. And my God, this woman has stories, you know, of like funny stories and sad stories and brilliant stories and stories that I can't repeat to you on Zoom, you know. And it was just a pleasure, and it was amazing.
So Thea, what was your reaction to now you finally have this amazing cast. And if you want to talk about how you brought them all together, I'd love to hear that story as well, for this, you know, illustrious historical table read. What was that like for you?
I can tell you that the energy in the room was incredible. It was a really wonderful combination of what you always hope for in those table reads, which is a combination of nervous energy and excitement, but huge, huge respect. And that was the thing that set the whole afternoon off, I would say. Everybody's ego was left at the door. Everybody was super humble, and there were a few people who did know each other, and a few people were, you know, so somebody like, for example, Tim sat next to Gemma. I put them next to each other, and they knew each other like from 500 years ago and hadn't seen each other for ages, but you know, and there were odd combinations of people who go, oh my God, didn't we do, you know, such and such from 25 years ago? You know, there was a little bit of that going on. And then, as Ange said, there was also just simply a sense of like, oh God. And of course, then Tim comes in and he's so modest and discreet. So it was very, very generous. Everybody went full out in terms of like accent, and everybody went for all the jokes. Some of them landed, some of them didn't, and that's what it's there for. That's what those rehearsal spaces are there for. As Anne said, it did feel very like putting on a play, you know, and the whole purpose of that period of time, which in movies you get very little of, is so that people can make mistakes and so that you feel safe. You make a mistake and everyone goes, well, that's okay. We know now not to do it like that. And you move that into a positive place, and you move that positive energy with you. There was a lot of laughter. I will say that Jessie in particular came out all guns blazing. She went full on 100%, which was amazing. And also for her, I don't know if she's ever, or at least not for quite a while, she hasn't done anything in her native accent.
Oh, she
and
has.
so that made it, really gave it an extra kind of somewhere that she could really kick into, because originally the script talked about quite a strong accent from the south of England, which we were all talking about, and I was talking individually with all the actors about how we would hit that so that it wasn't so strong that it would ever push anybody out. So for that reason, lots of people were trying out different things, which is what you have to do, right? Whereas Jessie didn't have that. Jessie could just go full on and go back to where she comes from. And she connected with Rose in such a way that she just went spinning, which was, you know, fantastic and a great energy. I mean, putting this cast together was wonderful, and really I felt so supported by the producers and by the studio in terms of all of my choices and how I wanted it to look, as well as how I wanted it to feel and to sound. Above all, I really needed people who understood comedy, who understood the craft of comedy. If you do it well, it comes across as effortless and easy. And everybody who tries to do it knows that it's the hardest. And so I needed people who had some kind of, if not training in it, as much experience as possible. Because you need to be really brave also, because if you know there's a joke there and it's not landing, you've got to keep going in there. And you've got to feel safe about that, and you've got to feel brave about that. So that was one of the key things that I needed when I was putting together the cast. And I also wanted people who were going to understand that it was a dramatic piece too. You know, there are really poignant moments that are as important to me as getting the swearing right. And everybody, all the actors, you know, they all reacted to the script with a similar understanding. And so I knew, from having met everybody beforehand, I knew that we were telling the same story, if that makes sense. This is a multi-layered script. There's a lot going on. And you just always need to make sure, it sounds obvious, but you need to make sure that everyone's telling the same story.
So I want to build on connections. I want to go back to you, Anjana, because this movie is also about women supporting women and the bond. And even though this is based on a court story, the dialogue, the whist, the chickens, like all of that, this is really about the power of unity and the connection with women. And also with you, you know, technically as a police officer, you would have to be very stoic, but yet the comedic beats and how you were able to give such a big performance, but so understated, and the bond that you formed. So I'd love for you to just talk about kind of finding your voice and also building this bond, this, band of sisters, this sisterhood.
Yeah. I think with her, I almost feel like she's the straight man in the comedy. She's definitely who the audience is following in terms of like she's the audience's guide for the story. And I felt like it was important to not play the comedy, but in trying to play the truth of it, I think it is true that when you're not trying to play the comedy and you're trying to be as serious as possible, then that's where the comedy comes from. And particularly with Gladys in the beginning of the movie, because she is someone who's almost trying too hard to be taken too seriously. She's standing up a bit too straight and she's desperate to be seen as someone who can be trusted and impress her superiors. There's comedy in someone who is that sort of earnest about everything, and I think I wanted to chart a journey where you see her relax into someone else. And I think if the first half of the movie is her trying to fit into a uniform that doesn't quite fit because she's spending a movie trying to do the right thing and the men and the system don't allow her to do that, then she gets the answers when you see her out of uniform. That's the first time you wonder, who is this woman and where is she from and what's her connection to the story and what is she trying to do? And that's when she starts to meet, the first time she meets Rose, there's a chemistry there, a realization that we're not actually that different. And then she starts meeting the women's whist and the community there. And I think she, I get a sense that Gladys was a very lonely person. And, you don't, apart from her niece, you don't see, and also it was a great sacrifice being a policewoman because you had to commit to not being married and not having children. So there is a loneliness inside her. And I think that there's a kind of camaraderie and joy that's found unexpectedly through meeting the other people. Yes, it's the investigation and she's trying to talk to a lot of people to find out what's happening, but these unexpected connections are happening. Certainly with Joanna Scannon's character, for example. And then I think you see this, and I wanted her physicality to feel different by the end of the movie as well, and really see her for like who she really is and what drives her. But you're right in that it becomes this beautiful story about female friendship. And I think that juxtaposed with the idea that we're often it's a very relatable thing. Yes, our story is set in the 1920s, but I think it has one foot in the now as well. And I think we can relate to the story of how the patriarchy and the system don't allow for the truth to surface and come to light. And we have to rely on the community and each other to help each other. Because there is another version of the story where Gladys just does what she's told, and that means she can advance, but it means she can't actually help help people, which is what she really wants to do as a police officer. It's not about getting a promotion, actually. It's about helping people for her.
And so, Thea, I know we're running out of time, but can you talk about how you built this bond and this storyline around this sisterhood around all of the women?
It's funny because listening to Ange, it also makes me think, I think we have to take a moment to also to acknowledge the men who stood so close with me shoulder to shoulder, I would say, in terms of the producing of the movie. It's really interesting. I've never worked on a movie that's had more women, both within the cast. The ratio of women to men was far more balanced towards women, which was fantastic. But within that, the men within the film, with the actors, the male actors within the film, were also so pleased and felt so privileged to be part of telling this story about these women, and understood the role that the men had to play in order for the women's for the women's story to be reflected by them, if that makes sense. You've got to have the men there in order to tell the female version. And the male actors were just fantastic in wanting to be part of that, and wanting their understood that their voices needed to be there too, which was brilliant. And obviously they also were so happy to be, by and large, characters who were either laughed at or kind of terrifying, to be honest. But we needed those in order to create our very female-centered world. The other thing that is just interesting to know is that behind the camera also, in terms of the crew, in terms of my HODs, again, I had more women than I've ever had before, which was fantastic. And I know that goes some way to explaining what the atmosphere was like on set. It just had a slightly different vibe to it. Having said that, similarly, again, I had all male producers, apart from the head of Studio Canal, who is a woman. Otherwise, I was largely supported by by men. So it was a kind of interesting dynamic. But I think and also we had a male writer. So we had a man who found the story originally and wanted to tell this story and wanted to write these parts so beautifully for women. So that we all of us girls just read this story and wanted to be part of it in whatever way we possibly could. So I think we have to give great credit to Johnny Sweet as well, because without him, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be able to discuss it in this way. And his generosity in wanting to put women right at the center of it, and all of these different friendships, and how important it is. The bond between women and female friendships is so important in life. I find the older I get, the more important I realize they are. And how women can hurt other women. When those friendships go wrong, the pain is almost indescribable. It's different to a heartbreak. It's worse somehow, because I always think that once I've made a female friend, they're going to be there forever with me. I don't expect them to go wrong. And when they do, it's very, very painful. And you need to work really hard at turning it round, which incidentally, I also think happens in this movie. I feel really strongly that the last scene where we truly see the three women, the triangle of the three women together, is so strong. They are so completely themselves. Each one of them has gone on this huge journey, that they all see each other for who they really are in that moment. And they're big enough to have let go of who they were at the beginning of the movie. And I feel really strongly that all three of them, in my head, part two, they're all friends. They've all managed to stay friends somehow. And that is also testament to female friendship, which is, I think, in many ways, what's really at the center of this movie.
Couldn't agree more. So I know we are out of time. For our viewing audience, your homework assignment, if you haven't seen Wicked Little Letters, you must run to the theater wherever you are in the world. It's playing globally. I want to thank you, Thea. I want to thank you, Anjana. I want to thank you, Rachel. Like I said, it was an hour and 40 minutes of pure joy. Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.